By means of a convoluted process, partially unknown to me, my loins have spontaneously decided it's finally time to review Theodore Sturgeon's The Dreaming Jewels. This is a novel. It's the first novel by this author I've taken up after being an aficionado of his short stories for quite some time. I discovered The Man Who Lost the Sea a few years ago during a time of bleak desolation, metaphysically carotid arteries, and a generally apathetic and cynical worldview on my part that had been intertwined with the symbolical arrangements of pain as I saw them. And when I discovered this writer, it was precisely the sort of wake-up call to the heart which, had I not encountered similar memes or themes, doubtlessly currently I would be in an aforementioned festering position. Without further ado, Ted Sturgeon is a man of great sympathy and eclectic temperament. You can see how he blends the philosophical with the mundane in all of his literature. This one specifically, the protagonist's name is Horty Blewett, and he's a midget of sorts. He's a freak, a deviant, an underdog, easily ridiculed due to his esoteric interests, going back to that old cliche that people most often fear what they do not understand. And so in the beginning, we see that he's been adopted by someone who later becomes a judge of sleazy proportions. And there's a brutal accident. A few of his appendages are, well, they're siphoned away from him in a rather gruesome manner. He runs away from home. He joins the circus, and he acquires contact with those who have found their sense of belonging in the shadiest, darkest, most obscure, but simultaneously extremely freewheeling. And this is a kernel for the liberation of beings who have previously been oppressed by, for example, the leader of the Carnies. Now, it's called the Dreaming Jewels. He may as well have said the Dreaming Crystals, because that's literally what this title portends toward. And so crystals have always fascinated me personally, because we know from human understanding that they're filled with lattice and geometrical structures which tend to aberrate themselves incrementally, plausibly in response to changing temperatures, climates, the swiftness of wind. You get the picture. And so, in the 21st century, for example, as the advent of quantum computing has become much closer of a reality, and the so-called qubit, or qubit, is the smallest unit which can possess information within the quantum computer. Now, I'm a little hazy on the details here, But the basic premise seems to operate on the idea of a surface area which makes itself perpetually available by flipping its sides, and that there are codifications implicit in how each amulet, bead, or pebble, if you will, within this system comes together in the same way that you can take a word and make it into an acronym or reveal an anagram. And so Sturgeon does a great deal of this in his works in general. The leader of the Carnies in this novel, his nickname is Man-Eater, and his human name is Pierre Monetre, so you can already see some of the cryptic teasing. Now, I want to be careful of not revealing too much, but hopefully to pique your interest in the domain of how symbolically and literally the handicapped, in one form or another, tend to weave a more cautious path in life, or insofar as one wishes to take the axiom that the cautious path in life is something that everyone is part and parcel completely privy to, that may not be falsifiable. But what's striking in this book, and throughout most of Sturgeon's literature, is the theme and premise of guardian spirits who learn how to master their own nonverbal matrices in such a way that they can send a signal across a room and have the person that it was specified for receive it, whilst the rest of the controlled atmosphere may insulate other entities from that signal. And this is a mechanism, a dynamic, which has eternally fascinated me, because, to posit another cliche, it's not so much what a person says as what they do, which provides a key to their character. And so Sturgeon really tries to mine the linguistic layers by which implicit messages are formulated and derived. So, in some ways, you can consider the Dreaming Jewels to be partly an arms race of consciousness. The premise is that Horty Blewett, this entity who does not grasp the nature of his own origins, he's attached to this doll in the very beginning, and the doll has crystals for eyes, and no one understands the function or purpose, except that when these two are separated, he asphyxiates, he goes into near-death experiences, and so on. And so finally, counterbalancing to the otherwise heavy-handed style of his father, it's decided that in order for the boy to live, and therefore to be of use to his abuser, it's important that his special toy be relegated in proximity to him and essentially forgotten about. So already we understand this is a huge mistake or a beginning. So after joining the carnival, he makes friends who introduce him to chemistry, physiology, and he discovers that he has an eidetic memory, which Sturgeon at one point claims to be the opposite of, paraphrasing here, a tour de force of methodology from the mind. In other words, I think what he's getting at in that minor statement is there's something about memory which is very passive. And this novel is very much about how people and creatures and entities, life itself, regardless of what form it takes, simultaneously inherits certain ideas which imprint themselves attitudinally upon behavior. And sometimes it's just a matter of discovering the right ideas that can either exfoliate your own deception or can render a surplus of insight by way of eliminating what is no longer relevant contextually. In biology, this is called latent inhibition. Look it up. I mean, after all, what else do you have to do? So, but think, right? And so, let's see, Havana and Xena and Bobby and Kay. These are all character names, and each of them is united insofar as existence being a struggle between one's head and one's heart. Now, when Sturgeon is attempting to delineate the forms and ideas of good and evil, which he does, I would not say ritualistically, but he somehow finds a way to permit the reader to most easily discern who you should be rooting for and who against. So, if that kind of fundamental negation of surprise does not lend itself to the alleys that you scavenge, literarily and otherwise, I don't read this book, I suppose. But there are aspects which read like a detective novel in the sense that you realize the crux of it all is the crystals and the exploration of their dreaming, which is never precisely delineated except to allude to a world of pure abstraction in diffused bifurcations, so that existence truly does precede essence, to use Sartre's term. So why should we care about these characters, and what sorts of insights may be gleaned? Well, Sturgeon is an author who is highly aware that human beings are very sensitive to shame very early on. And he has a way of using the ideal of innocence to dissolve tensions between those who are afraid, often for very legitimate reasons, and those who are hiding very deep secrets, not out of a sense of destructive embarrassment, but because what is glimpsed as precious yields the incentive to protect it, and one ought to be sure that the boat is not missed if perfection and the seamless transition of tectonic plates into a world in which either earthquakes are totally calculable or in which there are no earthquakes might be realized. The villain, Pierre Monetre, seems to hone psychic, telepathic, kinetic abilities to deliver hatred upon these crystals in an attempt to coax out their secrets. This is a kaleidoscopic love story. It's a tragedy. It's a tale of redemption and of restored innocence in a universe whereby the function and purpose of trust is very good at simulating its own integrity and often reveals the chinks in its armor when principles are applied to long-term scales to show whether they are the right principles or ones which are easily corrupted by forces that are qualitatively stronger and not because power is a justification or a finger pointing towards the moon of rightness necessarily, but that the buildup of energy requires, amongst other layers, a backbone of consistency in one form or another. And what Sturgeon, I think, tries to demonstrate is that if a person is willing to remain awake, alert, and oriented, all things are possible.